Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you.
Two moments from my tours this weekend. So first, I had one of the guests on my tour who it turns out was one of those people who has accidentally tried to steal another tour. So what happened was we were at the first stop and I was still in the rules when I'm just explaining like, hey, don't pee on people's houses, don't break things, don't do sexual shit. Basically all the stuff that you've heard on these stories, asking people not to do that. And I see that there is a group who's just come up and is doing the thing where they're just like standing near us, which is fine. But one of the girls from that group has fully turned towards us, away from her friends, and has taken a full step towards us. So she is basically like within arm's reach of my guests watching me. And I'm like, yeah, that's joining my tour. I should probably say something, but we're still in the rules. Like, she's gonna figure it out in a minute. And I wait and like keep talking, and eventually she does turn and leave, though it took longer than I thought it should have. But afterwards, I was talking to one of my guests and just mentioned in passing, like, I was really glad that she had not, like, tried to sneak on the tour because I always hate having to tell people no. And this guest was like, oh my God, and I know the feeling because I've been on the other side and it's the most embarrassing thing in the world. And I was like, do tell. And she explained that in another city, she didn't tell me where, but somewhere else, she had been on a tour, or she'd been just wandering around the streets, I should say, and she'd been standing near a group that were having this really animated conversation about science and ecology and the natural forces that shaped the area. And she got really interested in listening because this guy clearly knew his stuff and was talking really in depth and was really like engaging everybody, asking them questions. And when he got to the end of his little spiel, he asked, like, any questions? And she was like, oh, I have a question. Like, are you a professor at one of the nearby colleges? That's really cool. And I'm sorry to interrupt y'all's conversation. I just am really fascinated. And he was like, yeah, no, I'm a tour guide. This is a private tour that you've been stealing. And at least according to her, what she did was blush bright red, apologize profusely, and be like, oh my God, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. And objectively, if that is what she did, then yes, she is the most polite tour hanger on that I have ever heard of. But the other incident. So I was at one of the more popular spots, and annoyingly, another tour guide had come up and parked his group way too close to mine. And it was one of those nights I'm like, dude, there's plenty of room further down. Why on earth would you come and park this close to me? Especially considering I've seen this guide about 100 million times. I know that he does this on a regular basis. And I also know that he does not have as loud as a voice as I do. Especially on nights as that night, I had a big group. So I was talking pretty loud, but I could still sort of half hear him speaking out of the corner of my ear. And about halfway through the stop, I'm really into talking about the like inner workings of what's going on and really interested. And I suddenly realized I'm not hearing him anymore. So I sort of glanced over, being like, is he done? Did he already finish and leave somehow? And I see that his group is still there and they're sort of milling about. And I can see someone sitting on the ground. I'm like, oh, he had a guest pass out. Okay. He's dealing with that. That's fine. And I continue my story. And it continues on for a while that he's not taking back up his story. And I'm like, what's going on? And I glance over again and I realize that I can't see him. And I realize that the person on the ground is the tour guide. And I'm like, oh. And I literally just stutter to the stop in the middle of what I'm saying and just like look at my guest and go, and the tour guide next to us just passed out. And my guests are looking at me like, what do we do? Do we go help? And I'm like, I really don't think it will be helpful to have an additional like 20 something people suddenly crowding around being like, are you okay? And I can see that his guests are fanning him. Somebody has clearly gotten him water. And like everybody else is sort of stepping back and giving him room. So I'm like, he'll be fine. I can see he's sitting up. We're just going to continue the story. The problem is, as soon as I start back in the story, another tour guide is bringing their group behind us to pass by. And I'm sort of like trying to catch his eyes to signal that maybe he doesn't want to like cross right behind us. Maybe he would like to cross the street beforehand, just because there's chaos. But of course, he's focused on his guests. He's not paying attention to me. So he makes it so that he has made it past my group, but the majority of his guests are still behind me when he realizes what's going on. And he freezes, which means I have, besides my like 20 something guests, there are another 20 people standing behind my guests, sort of like looking at me, looking at him, looking at like the other guests, being like, what's going on? And eventually the other tour guide decides he's just gonna take his group across the street so as to not add to the chaos. But that means that he's trying to cross the street right past me. And the thing about crossing the street as a tour guide, if you're not on the corner, most of the guests are not going to walk to the spot that you left the sidewalk and continue over. No, they just leave the sidewalk wherever they are. So you'll end up with this line of people stepping out into the street. And that's what they tried to do, but most of them were behind my guests. So suddenly there are people like trying to squeeze through my guests to get out to the street. And I'm like, oh my God, guys. You are making this so much harder than it actually is. But yeah, so be aware, even though it has cooled down, it's not nearly as hot as it was. It's still hot enough to pass out on the streets of New Orleans. So still drink your water, still eat salt tablets and whatnot.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share your own experiences in the comments below.